the artist who lost his sight and met the nurse who made him see. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. It began in silence. The once vibrant walls of Ethan Cole's penthouse were now covered with white sheets, hiding paintings that once sold for millions. The smell of turpentine still lingered, mixed with the sterile scent of medicine. A year ago, Ethan had been the most celebrated visual artist in New York. His exhibition sold out in minutes. But after the car crash, everything went dark. Literally. The doctors called it irreversible optic nerve damage. To Ethan, it felt like punishment, a cruel twist for a man whose entire world depended on color and light. Every sound echoed louder now, the tick of the clock, the faint hum of the city below, the emptiness of his own breathing. The man who once painted dawns now lived in permanent dusk. When his manager told him the board of patrons was pulling their funding for his late mother's art foundation unless he showed signs of stability, Ethan laughed bitterly. Stability? He muttered. They want a wife. They want a picture of a happy, functioning man. That was when she walked in. Clara Nguyen, a nurse in her early 30s, calm voice, no makeup, hair pulled neatly back. She was not from his world of champagne and spotlights. She was there on contract, to help him recover, to keep him safe from his own frustration. She had no idea what he was about to ask. When she reached for the pills on his nightstand, he said quietly, "Miss Nguyen, I need a wife." She froze. "I am sorry?" "Not for real," Ethan said, his tone even, controlled, as if discussing a business transaction. "Just on paper. A marriage contract. The board needs to believe I have someone in my life, or they will shut down my foundation." Clara stared, half convinced he was joking. "You cannot be serious." "Completely serious," he said. 6 months. I cover your father's hospital bills, you help me keep my reputation intact. No emotions, no attachments. Just an arrangement. The silence that followed was heavier than the city outside. She should have refused. She wanted to. But the image of her father lying in the hospital bed, bills stacked higher than her courage, haunted her. "You do not even know me," she whispered. Ethan's lips curved in something between a smile and a scar. "That is exactly why this could work." Clara looked around the penthouse at the veiled canvases, the untouched piano, the man who had lost everything he once saw. Then she said, 6 months? 6 months, he confirmed. The deal was made, sealed with a nod instead of a ring. Outside, the city lights flickered across the skyline, unseen by him, but still alive. Neither of them knew it yet, but that one desperate contract would become the beginning of something neither art nor logic could ever explain. The morning after the contract was signed, Clara arrived at Ethan's penthouse with a small suitcase and a heart full of second thoughts. The marble floors gleamed, and every sound echoed through the silence. She had been inside hospitals quieter than this place. Ethan stood near the grand piano, his white cane resting against it, his posture sharp, controlled. He turned slightly at the sound of her steps. "You are punctual," he said. "Good." His voice carried the tone of someone used to giving orders. Clara nodded, unsure if he could sense her unease. "Where should I put my things?" she asked softly. "The guest room on the left. That will be your space. Breakfast is at 8. I do not eat much, but the staff will prepare something for you too." His sentences sounded mechanical, rehearsed. It was clear this was not a home, only a stage set for appearances. Later that morning, Ethan's manager, Mr. Haynes, arrived to finalize the paperwork. "Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Cole," he said with a grin that did not reach his eyes. "The press release goes out tonight. A simple private wedding. No interviews, of course. You understand. Ethan simply nodded. Clara signed the final form, her hand trembling slightly. When Haynes left, the door clicked shut with a sound that felt too final. For the first time, they were truly alone. Ethan spoke first. We will have to attend a charity gala in 2 weeks. You will need a dress suitable for the event. I will have someone arrange it. Clara frowned. That is not necessary. I can handle that myself. He tilted his head slightly, a faint smile at the edge of his lips. I forgot. You are not used to being handled. She exhaled slowly, counting to 3 in her head before replying. No, I am used to doing things on my own. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Ethan said quietly, you will find this arrangement easier if you stop expecting it to make sense. That night, Clara stood by the window in her room, watching the skyline glow against the dark. She thought of her father, still in the hospital, and whispered a silent promise. She would endure this, no matter how cold Ethan seemed. Down the hall, Ethan sat in his studio, though he could not see it anymore. The air smelled faintly of linseed oil and dust. His fingers traced the edge of a canvas as if memory alone could paint again. His mind replayed her footsteps, the hesitation in her breath. She was careful, too careful, as if she feared to disturb a ghost. He remembered the way people used to move around him before admiring, flattering, pretending to understand his art. Clara was different. She did not fill the silence with empty comfort. She simply existed, quietly, like background music that refused to fade. Days passed. Their routine settled. She read him the news every morning, guided him through the penthouse, and labeled his belongings in braille stickers she made herself. He never asked her to, but she did it anyway. One afternoon, while preparing tea, she heard soft notes from the piano. Ethan's fingers moved slowly, uncertainly, over the keys. The melody was broken, hesitant, like someone remembering how to speak. Clara stood in the doorway, not wanting to interrupt. When the music stopped, he said quietly, "Do you play?" "A little," she answered. "My mother taught me before she passed." "Then play something," he said, turning his face toward her voice. She hesitated, then sat beside him. Her fingers found the keys, and a gentle tune filled the room. It was not perfect, but it was alive. When the song ended, he whispered, "For a moment, I almost saw it again." Clara blinked, unsure what to say. The silence between them was no longer heavy. It was fragile, like light filtering through a window that had been shut for too long. Neither of them spoke again, but something had shifted. Somewhere between duty and silence, a spark of humanity began to return to Ethan's world. And though neither would admit it, that moment at the piano was the first crack in the wall they both had built around themselves. A week later, the official marriage license arrived. Clara stared at it on the kitchen counter, her name written beside his in perfect black ink. It looked too clean, too permanent. She touched the paper lightly and whispered to herself, "It is just a contract." Ethan's cane tapped softly as he entered the room. "Do you regret it already?" he asked, sensing her hesitation. She straightened. "No. I just never imagined signing my name next to someone I barely know." His lips curved faintly. "You will find that most marriages work exactly that way." There was no cruelty in his tone, only quiet resignation. After breakfast, she found him sitting by the covered paintings again, fingertips tracing the fabric like he was trying to remember every line beneath it. "You miss painting," she said gently. He nodded once. "It was how I breathed. Now I just listen to other people describe the world I used to see." Clara hesitated, then lifted the edge of one of the white sheets. The canvas underneath revealed a portrait of a woman in sunlight, unfinished, the brushstrokes bold yet tender. "Who is she?" Clara asked softly. "My mother," he said. "She believed art could heal what medicine could not." He paused, then added, "She was wrong. She died before she could see me lose everything. The air hung heavy. Clara lowered the sheet carefully, her heart aching for him in a way that scared her. Later that afternoon, Mr. Haynes called to remind Ethan about the upcoming gala. The press will be watching, he warned. You and your wife need to look convincing. No cold distance this time. People must believe in the love story. After the call, Ethan turned toward Clara. Apparently, we must pretend to adore each other, he said. Pretend, she repeated quietly. I can manage that. Over the next few days, the penthouse began to change. The staff returned to prepare for the event. A stylist arrived with racks of gowns, shoes, and jewelry. Clara stood awkwardly as the woman fussed over her, pinning fabric, checking measurements. Ethan sat nearby, listening to the rustle of silk. Do you like it? Clara asked, uncertain. Describe it to me, he said. It is navy blue, simple, but elegant. Not the flashy kind of dress you would expect at a gala. He smiled faintly. Then it sounds perfect. The night before the event, Clara found him in the studio again, hands resting on the piano keys. You should get some sleep, she said softly. He shook his head. I cannot. Every time I close my eyes, I see light I cannot touch. She walked closer. You will find it again, Ethan. Maybe not with your eyes, but with something else. He turned his face toward her voice. You sound like her, he whispered. Who? My mother. She used to say the same thing. For a moment, the air between them felt warmer, closer. But then he pulled back, as if remembering the invisible wall between them. The next evening arrived like a storm of flashbulbs and whispers. The gala hall glowed with chandeliers and polished marble. Reporters murmured, cameras clicked, and all eyes turned when Ethan Cole and his new wife stepped onto the red carpet. Clara's hand rested lightly on his arm, guiding him through the crowd. He moved with practiced grace, his blindness invisible to the untrained eye. A journalist shouted, Mr. Cole, how does it feel to be back after your accident? Ethan smiled politely. It feels like seeing the world again, in a different way. The crowd laughed softly, impressed. Inside the ballroom, Clara guided him to their table. The orchestra played softly, and for the first time since his accident, Ethan felt something stir inside him, an unfamiliar calm. When the host called his name for the speech, he froze for a second. Clara leaned close and whispered, talk about color. They came for your art, not your past. He stepped forward, hands gripping the podium, and began to speak. His words were slow, but steady. When I lost my sight, I thought my world had ended. But maybe losing sight is how we begin to see what truly matters. The room fell silent. Cameras flashed. When he returned to his seat, Clara was smiling. He reached for her hand instinctively. It was the first time he had done it without pretending. After the gala, everything began to shift in ways neither of them expected. The headlines were kind, almost admiring Ethan Cole returns, guided by love. The photographs showed a man reborn, his wife beside him, smiling as if she had always belonged to that world of lights and applause. But when they returned home that night, the silence was different. It was softer. Clara removed her heels and set them by the door, laughing quietly when Ethan said, I imagine they were high enough to make you taller than me. Almost, she replied. But only when I stood perfectly still. He smiled, a sound more than an expression, and said, Thank you, Clara. For tonight. You made it bearable. You made it beautiful, she said, her voice gentler than she intended. Their eyes met, or rather, his face turned toward where he felt her gaze. For a heartbeat, it felt like seeing. The days that followed moved in quiet rhythm. Clara resumed her routine of helping him navigate the apartment, labeling spices, reading him emails, and occasionally teasing him about his grumpy comments toward his voice assistant. One afternoon, she brought home fresh flowers. The smell filled the kitchen. What color are they? He asked, smiling faintly. Yellow, she said. The kind that smells like sunlight. He nodded, letting the image form in his mind. Then leave them where the light hits best. I want to remember that. Over time, their boundaries began to blur. The contract still sat folded in a drawer, untouched, but it felt less like a rule and more like a ghost. At night, she sometimes heard him walking through the studio, tracing the edges of his old canvases, whispering the names of colors under his breath: crimson, cobalt, amber. One evening, he called out, "Clara, can you come here?" She entered the room to find him standing near an easel, a blank canvas before him. "I want to try," he said. "To paint again." She hesitated. "Are you sure?" "No," he said honestly. "But that never stopped me before." He handed her a small jar. "Describe it." "The color." She smiled softly. "It is sky blue. The kind of blue you see just before dawn." He dipped the brush carefully and began to move it across the canvas. The strokes were uneven, but deliberate. Clara watched as the color slowly appeared. He could not see it, but somehow, it felt like he could feel it. Hours passed without words. When he finally stopped, he looked exhausted, sweat glistening on his forehead. She wiped it gently with a towel. He did not pull away. "It is not perfect," he said. "It does not have to be," she whispered. That night, the world outside seemed quieter. The city lights flickered through the curtains, and for the first time in months, Ethan slept without nightmares. The next morning, Clara woke early to find him already in the kitchen, making coffee. "Good morning," she said in surprise. "You are up early." "I heard you talk in your sleep," he teased. She flushed. "What did I say?" "You told me to stop being stubborn," he said with a small smile. "Sounds like something I would say," she replied, and for the first time, they both laughed freely. Days turned into weeks. The gallery world whispered about his recovery, about the mysterious woman who had brought color back into his life. Invitations arrived daily, but Ethan ignored most of them. Instead, he spent his days painting by touch and memory, guided by Clara's quiet voice. Sometimes she would stand behind him, describing colors. Other times, she would simply hum. It was in those moments that the penthouse no longer felt like a cage. It felt like a home. Yet beneath that peace, something unspoken lingered. They both knew their time was borrowed, bound by a contract that would soon expire. But neither dared to mention it. Not yet. For now, the illusion was enough, the illusion that they were not pretending, that the love the world saw was somehow real. The first real test of their fragile peace came on a cold Friday morning. Ethan had just finished a new piece, a textured portrait built entirely from memory and touch. Clara stood behind him, describing what she saw: the layers of blue, the streaks of gold, the faint outline of a horizon. "It is beautiful," she said softly. "It feels like light breaking through clouds." He smiled, tired but proud. "Then maybe I am not completely blind after all." But their quiet triumph did not last. Later that afternoon, Mr. Haynes stormed into the penthouse without warning. His tone was sharp, businesslike. "Ethan, we need to talk. The press is asking questions. Someone leaked your marriage contract." Clara froze in the doorway, her heart racing. Ethan's expression hardened. "What did you say?" "There are rumors that your wife was hired," Haynes continued. "That she was paid to marry you in exchange for her father's hospital bills. They are calling it a publicity stunt." The room went silent. Clara's voice trembled. "That is not true." Haynes looked at her, unimpressed. "It does not matter what is true, it matters what people believe. We have to fix this before it destroys everything you have rebuilt." Ethan clenched his jaw. "Leave us," he said coldly. When Haynes was gone, Clara stepped closer, trying to explain. "Ethan, I did not tell anyone. I swear." He turned his face toward her voice, his eyes distant, unreadable. It does not matter, he said quietly. They will believe what fits their story. She shook her head, tears threatening to fall. You do not really believe that I would sell you out, do you? I believe that people do desperate things when they are cornered, he said. The words cut sharper than he intended. Clara stepped back as if struck. You think I am one of them? I think we made a mistake, he said, his tone low, almost regretful. She stood frozen, watching the man she had cared for retreat behind the walls he once tried to tear down. Without another word, she walked out of the room. That night, Ethan sat alone in the dark, the echo of her footsteps replaying in his mind. He wanted to call her back, to tell her he did not mean it, but pride held his tongue. For the first time since his accident, the silence felt suffocating again. The next morning, Clara was gone. Her room was empty, her few belongings packed neatly. On the kitchen counter lay her wedding ring and a small envelope addressed to him. Inside, there was no letter, only a sketch his face, drawn from memory, with a single tear painted in watercolor. He held the paper for a long time, his hands trembling. For days, he did not paint. The apartment fell quiet once more, the flowers wilted, and the piano gathered dust. Then one afternoon, while listening to the news, he heard her name. The anchor announced an upcoming charity art exhibition Light Returns organized by the very foundation his mother had once dreamed of. The artist behind the project was listed as Clara Nguyen. Ethan's heart jolted. She had not disappeared. She had built something new, something born from what they had shared. That night, Ethan called Haynes. Book me a seat at that exhibition, he said. And make sure the world knows Ethan Cole is coming. When the night of the event arrived, the gallery buzzed with anticipation. Ethan entered slowly, guided by his cane, ignoring the flash of cameras and whispered. He could not see the paintings, but he could feel the air shift as people moved, their voices hushed in awe. In the center of the room, the largest canvas hung in silence. Clara's voice came through the speaker system, calm and steady. This work is called Light Returns. It was inspired by someone who taught me that sight is not about eyes. It is about courage. Ethan's chest tightened. He followed the sound of her voice until he stopped in front of the painting. The texture beneath his fingers felt familiar, rough, layered, alive. A tear rolled down his cheek as applause filled the gallery. He whispered under his breath, "You made me see again, Clara. Even without me." The exhibition was the talk of the city for weeks. Critics called it a masterpiece of emotion, a story told through color and texture rather than sight. Ethan attended every day it remained open, sitting quietly in the corner of the main hall, listening to the voices of visitors as they described the paintings aloud. They said the collection felt like hope itself. He never corrected them, never revealed that he was the reason behind those pieces. It was not his story, Anna Marie, it was hers. Yet one evening, when the gallery was about to close, a familiar voice broke through the low murmur of the crowd. "You should not be standing so close to the artwork, Mr. Cole," Clara said softly. He froze, turning toward her voice. "I was waiting," he said quietly. "I was not sure you would come." She stepped closer, her tone calm but cautious. "I did not expect you to. After everything that happened, I thought you wanted to forget me." He shook his head. "Forget you," he said, almost laughing. "How could I? You turned my darkness into light." There was a long pause between them, filled with the hum of the gallery lights and the faint echo of distant footsteps. "You should not have come," she whispered. "You do not owe me anything." Ethan smiled faintly. "That is where you are wrong. I owe you everything. You gave me a reason to breathe again." Clara's voice softened, breaking slightly. "You hurt me, Ethan. You let the world's noise drown what we had. I could not stay and watch you stop believing in me." "I never stopped," he said, his words trembling. "I stopped believing in myself." He reached out a hand, uncertain, hesitant. She looked at it for a long moment before finally taking it. His fingers closed gently around hers. Do you know what I realized? He asked. Every artist paints what he cannot say. And every painting I tried to finish after you left it was always you. Your voice, your kindness, your faith. Clara blinked back tears. You do not need me anymore, Ethan. You are painting again. You are living again. He shook his head. I am surviving. There is a difference. They stood in silence, the weight of unspoken words between them. Finally, she said, the board reinstated your foundation. The press wants to feature your story again. They will be here in the morning. You should be proud. I do not care about the press, he said. I came here for you. She took a slow breath. Why now? Because the first time I asked you for something, it was selfish. It was a deal to protect my image. But now I am asking for something real. Not a contract, not an arrangement. I am asking for a chance. Her voice wavered. A chance for what? For us, he said simply. To stop pretending. The gallery lights dimmed slightly as the night staff prepared to close. A soft rain began to fall outside, tapping against the glass walls. Clara looked toward the window, then back at him. You cannot see it, she said, but the rain makes the city glow. It looks like the world is breathing again. He smiled faintly. Then describe it to me. She stepped closer, still holding his hand. It is silver and gold under the streetlights. Every drop looks like it is dancing. Then maybe, he whispered, the world is celebrating you. She laughed quietly, tears mixing with the sound of the rain. For the first time since the accident, Ethan felt peace, not the quiet kind that comes from solitude, but the living kind that comes from forgiveness. Clara rested her head lightly against his shoulder. Neither spoke. Outside, the city continued to breathe, and for a moment, time itself seemed to stand still. Somewhere between apology and acceptance, they both understood that this was not the end of their story. It was the beginning of something real. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the tall glass windows of the gallery, glinting off the polished floors. Clara and Ethan stood together before the final painting, the one she had called Light Returns. The crowd would be back soon, but for now, it was theirs alone. Clara traced the edge of the canvas with her fingertips, while Ethan listened to the soft rhythm of her breath. I never thought you would come back, she said quietly. Neither did I, he replied. But sometimes the only way forward is to return to where you lost yourself. She turned toward him, eyes searching his face. You found yourself through pain, Ethan. That takes courage. He smiled faintly. No. I found myself through you. Before she could answer, Mr. Haynes entered the hall, his voice brisk as always. Ethan, there you are. The media is waiting outside. They want to talk about the exhibition. This is your big moment. Ethan shook his head slowly. Not yet. Haynes frowned. Do not throw this away. The world finally loves you again. Ethan's tone was calm but steady. I am not interested in being loved by the world. I just want to be honest for once. He turned toward Clara, his expression soft but sure. When we signed that contract, I promised no emotions. No attachments. But I broke every rule I made. And I do not regret it. Haynes stared between them, realizing there was no changing his mind. Then do what you must, he muttered before walking away. The door closed, leaving the two of them alone again. Clara whispered, What are you going to tell them? Ethan smiled. The truth. That the woman they called a lie became the only truth I ever knew. Her eyes glistened, a mixture of pride and disbelief. Ethan, if you say that, they will twist it. They always do. Let them, he said softly. I am done living for their stories. This one is ours. Outside, the noise of reporters began to grow louder, flashes from cameras cutting through the glass like lightning. Ethan extended his hand toward her. "Walk with me?" he asked. She hesitated, then nodded. Together they stepped into the light. The cameras flashed, voices shouted questions, but Ethan did not flinch. He faced the crowd and spoke clearly, his hand still holding hers. "This woman," he said, "is not my contract. She is my heart. She saved me when I could not even save myself. And if you want a story, tell that one." The reporters fell silent for a moment, caught off guard by his words. Clara squeezed his hand, her chest tightening with emotion. For the first time, there was no act, no pretense, only truth. As they walked away from the noise, Ethan whispered, "Do you hear that?" She smiled softly. "What?" "The silence," he said. "It finally feels like peace." Clara looked up at him, tears shining under the sunlight. "Then let us keep it that way." The world watched as they disappeared down the steps, two silhouettes against the golden morning, no longer bound by a contract but by something real, something neither of them had planned for but both had been searching for all along. In the weeks that followed, Ethan and Clara's story spread far beyond the art world. The headlines were no longer about scandal or contracts, but about redemption and courage. Reporters called it a love that painted light out of darkness. Yet behind the quiet success, life had settled into something simpler, more human. They had moved out of the penthouse into a smaller house near the coast, a place where the sound of the ocean replaced the noise of the city. Ethan spent his mornings walking along the sand with his cane, memorizing the rhythm of the waves. Clara often walked beside him, describing the world in colors and textures the way she once had in his studio. "The sea is deep green today," she would say. "And the sky looks like it was brushed with silver." He would smile and reply, "Then I can almost see it." Their days were slower now, filled with laughter, quiet meals, and late nights spent listening to old records. For the first time, there was no schedule, no audience, no expectation, only the freedom to exist. But one afternoon, Ethan received a letter from the board of the foundation. They wanted him to return as the creative director, to rebuild the program that his mother once started. Clara encouraged him gently. "You should do it. That was always your dream." He hesitated. "It was my dream when I thought I had something to prove. Now, I just want to create without being watched." She smiled. "Then do it your way. Not as Ethan Cole, the millionaire artist. Just as Ethan, the man who paints because he loves it." Her words stayed with him. That night, he set up a small studio in their living room, no press, no lights, just the sound of the ocean outside and Clara's voice nearby. He began to paint again, each stroke filled with quiet gratitude. Months passed, and the walls slowly filled with new works, paintings that told stories of touch, sound, and love found in unexpected places. One evening, Clara found him working late. The canvas before him glowed softly under the lamp. She asked, "What will you call this one?" He paused, then said, "Home." She looked at the painting closely. It was abstract, a swirl of warm golds and soft whites that somehow felt alive. "It feels like sunlight through curtains," she said. "That is exactly what I wanted it to feel like," he answered. She stepped closer, resting a hand on his shoulder. "You know, for a man who cannot see, you paint the world better than anyone I know." He smiled gently. "Maybe because I have you to describe it." Outside, the ocean wind carried the faint scent of salt and rain. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Ethan turned toward her and said, "Do you ever think about how strange it was? How everything began with a contract?" Clara laughed softly. "And ended with a promise," she replied. He reached for her hand and whispered, "No more contracts, no more deals. Just us." She nodded, her eyes bright. "Just us." And as the tide rolled in and the stars appeared above, the man who had once lived in darkness finally found his light again, not on a canvas, but in the heart of the woman who had taught him how to see. 1 year later, the waves outside their coastal home sounded the same, steady and gentle, but life inside had changed in ways neither of them could have imagined. Ethan's new collection, titled The Shape of Light, had quietly taken the world by surprise. Critics praised its raw emotion, the way each painting seemed to breathe, to reach for something unseen. But for Ethan, the greatest masterpiece was not hanging in any gallery. It was sitting across from him at their kitchen table, smiling softly over morning coffee. Clara had left the hospital to join the foundation full-time, running art therapy programs for children with disabilities. Watching her speak to those children, describing colors and textures with warmth and patience, made Ethan realize that she was still healing people, just in a different way. One afternoon, she came home to find him sitting in the garden, surrounded by small canvases and the smell of fresh paint. The sun was low, and the air shimmered gold. "You are supposed to be resting," she teased. "I am," he said, smiling. "Painting is resting now." She laughed and knelt beside him, her fingers brushing a streak of color on his arm. "You are a mess." "So are you," he replied, catching her hand gently. For a moment, they simply stayed like that, quiet, close, content. Then Ethan said softly, "Clara, there is something I need to ask you." She raised an eyebrow. "That sounds serious." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Inside was a simple silver ring, elegant and unpolished, as if made for touch rather than show. "The first time I asked you to marry me, it was business. A deal to keep my world from falling apart. This time, it is because you built me a new one. Will you marry me again, this time for real?" Clara covered her mouth, eyes welling up. "Ethan, you cannot even see the ring." He smiled gently. "I do not need to. I already know what forever looks like." She laughed through her tears and whispered, "Yes. 1,000 times yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, his hands trembling slightly, and for the first time since the accident, he saw light not with his eyes, but somewhere deeper. Weeks later, their small wedding took place on the beach at sunset. There were no cameras, no reporters, just a few close friends and the sound of the ocean as their witness. Clara wore a simple white dress, and Ethan, in a linen suit, stood barefoot on the sand. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Ethan reached for her face, tracing her smile with his fingertips before kissing her. The crowd cheered softly, and the sea breeze carried the scent of salt and paint and new beginnings. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Clara whispered, "Do you see it? The light?" Ethan nodded. "Always. Because it is you." The story that had begun with a contract ended not with fame or fortune, but with something far rarer: peace, forgiveness, and love that asked for nothing in return. And as the waves rolled endlessly toward the shore, their laughter rose above it, steady and bright, like the light they had found in each other.